It's every Red Raiders favorite podcast. This is the Tech Talk Podcast from Double T 97.3.
Hey, it's the Juice on Double T 97.3 and Double T 97.3.com. Brought to you by our good friends at Specs Wine, Spirits, and Finer Foods. Time for some headlines. Texas Rangers baseball team will be in action tonight, hosting the Oakland Athletics after a quick trip to Miami. First pitch from Globe Life Field, 7:05 p.m. Our pregame coverage will begin for you at 6:30 here on Double T 97.3. Rangers are 61-80 overall, 30 games back of the first place Houston Astros in the AL West division standings. We will have those Astros for you tonight on 100.7 The Score as they take on the Detroit Tigers. We'll join that game in progress following the high school fan zone, which begins at 7 on 100.7 The Score. Astros game will be in Detroit, Comerica Park. That's in Michigan.
Yeah, our boy Framber last night, complete game shutout.
How about that?
Made those Tigers look like little leaguers.
Kitty cats.
Yeah, there you go, kitty cats.
Cat pun.
Yep.
Former Texas Tech star Jarrett Culver has signed a two-way contract with the Atlanta Hawks. Terms were not disclosed. He comes to Atlanta from the Memphis Grizzlies, where he appeared in 37 games, averaging 3.5 points and 1.3 rebounds in 9.1 minutes per game. He was drafted 6th overall in the 2019 NBA draft by the Phoenix Suns, and his draft rights were traded pretty quickly after that to the Timberwolves. Dak Prescott might not go on injured reserve. Cowboys owner and GM Jerry Jones saying today that Prescott, he might be a consideration to play sometime in the next 4 games. Initially, the timeline for Prescott to return from his thumb injury was 6 to 8 weeks, but Jones said the report after the surgery was more favorable, and theoretically, Prescott could be back in time for the October 9th game against the Rams in Los Angeles. That's Week 5.
That really surprises me, but I'm sure it's good news for Cowboy fans. I just wasn't expecting that.
You too can join the program. We would love to hear from you today. Let us know what you think on the Yates Flooring Center chat line at doublet973.com. or through the Double T 97.3 mobile app presented by Happy State Bank. Gus, did you watch any of the Baylor BYU game on Saturday? It was a late one.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I did not.
I was trying to finish that one out in bed. It was fourth quarter, about 2 minutes to go, and the score was tied. It really seemed like, hey, man, overtime is really likely here. Do I want to commit myself? Because once overtime starts, I'm in for the duration.
Yep.
You know? And I was really tired, and you know what? I'm going to pause it. I'm going to wake up and watch it when I wake up. And so I did that. But the most interesting / gross thing about that broadcast, are you familiar at all with cougar tails?
Mm-mm.
All right?
No, sir.
It's not some kind of like tawdry Cinemax, drama,
or
air on late nights,
stories of young men's travails at the middle-aged lady bars.
It's a baked good. It's like I don't know the precise kind of ingredient or flavor profile, but just from watching it on TV, it was like a long kind of donut type thing,
okay,
served in almost like a breadstick sack, if that makes sense, right? A paper, kind of a elongated paper sack. And so they sell them at this BYU stadium. And the reason I bring this up is because the camera showed a group of, I believe, BYU students, but certainly BYU fans, just kind of like passing it around. And not like, across the row from a fan, like, hey, okay, here, Dad takes a bite, and then Mom, and then, Sally, and then, little Jimmy, and then, no, this is like, hey, man, I don't know you. You're sitting behind me, but you want a bite of this? Sure. And then they just keep passing it around, like all around the section. Did you see this, Clint?
I would regard that as unusual with any sort of a food item.
I mean, did we not just get out of a pandemic?
Yeah, we're not passing a bottle of whiskey around, or what are you describing there? You're talking about a pastry. I know.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah, and what was blowing my mind was it would like pass a couple people before it would get to the next bite, and like they had the little weird wrapper thing on it, but no one was really paying attention to the wrapper, and they were just grabbing the thing. Like everyone's little grubby cougar fingers.
Well, it wasn't
all
like
over
they
there.
were like grabbing bites off. It was just like biting straight from the cougar tail.
They weren't like selective, like, oh, I'll bite from this side, you bite from this side.
Is it some desserty delicious thing, or what do we got here?
Yeah, no, it's like a long donut.
Okay.
Here, look. This is useless for anybody listening, but like I'm just watch.
And so
You're
you
just kind of passing it around.
It was like a
that's
really big maple bar.
That's just the nicest thing I've ever seen right there. Just a bunch of
Just like
and not
around
on one
to
of them
strangers.
just pulling it. I mean, and that would be perfect to just pull a chunk of it off and eat. What you're saying, and they're just eating that thing like a. I mean, this goodness.
I mean, it looks good, like tasty. I would.
I mean, not a one of them made any sort of a unsavory face when they chomped on that thing.
They are 15-inch long maple bars. Maple donut bars, first sold in 2006. At each home game last year, BYU sold an average. How many cougar tails do you think that they sold on average per game day?
So there's probably about 50,000 in the stands. I'll go with 5,000.
8,500.
Wow, it's a good number.
8,500.
The Chiefs this year, Kansas City,
Right?
are selling a Doritos encrusted empanada with ground beef, onions, cheddar jack cheese, and then a kind of an avocado cream type dipping thing. Doritos encrusted empanada with ground beef, onions, cheddar jack cheese.
I'm all the way there.
There's a picture of it. I like all those things. I mean, right?
And that's like perfect stadium food.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not the Dorito leftovers on your fingers.
Yeah,
That's
some
not
crumbs,
ideal.
Yeah, sure.
But hey, man, finger food, little dip in action. You get some protein, some carbs.
Yeah,
Top notch.
it's delightful.
This in the Yates Flooring Center chat line. Lindell Jeff says this. I saw that on the BYU broadcast. Made me want to puke. Chris the Dasher says it looked like the BYU equivalent of someone passing a flask around. Yeah, I mean it's pretty much the way that it was.
Sort of where I was going with that. Or at a rock concert and something else.
And then Jeff adds that RG3 made a puff pass.
There we go.
Analogy.
He said it for me.
This in the challenge from Sooner in Lubbock. 2 guys from Lubbock on the Hawks. That's pretty cool. That's true. Trey Young and now Jarrett Culver.
Yep. West Texas roots, baby.
Man, I'm shocked that that Culver. Not that I'm some kind of big basketball draft guy, but stunned that Culver's career has not kind of taken off a bit more than it has. I mean, he's on his third team.
Yeah, lottery pick.
2-way contract now. It's quite the fall in just like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, and then the for those who don't know, the NBA 2-way contract is sort of what it's like what Mooney and those guys have been signed to over the last few years, where they're playing a lot in the G League and then trying to get, when they get called up, and I don't know exactly how that works, but the baseball equivalent of like a guy that's going back and forth between AAA and the big leagues, like what Davis Martin's done, I think 8 times this year. And so, when you really put that up against lottery pick, not just a guy that made
6th overall pick.
Yeah,
this isn't like back end of anything.
And so, and I know there's been some injuries and stuff, so you never know. Get healthy and get healthy and get good and get it going, that'd be awesome for him. But because the health is, he's had some feet and ankle problems, and that's a tough thing to deal with in that sport.
We'll have the Rangers coming up for you at 6:30 on Double T 97.3. This is Tech Talk.
The podcast that finishes your workday in a very Red Raider way. This is the Tech Talk Podcast from Double T 97.3.
Hi, how are you? Good afternoon. It's Tech Talk on Double T 97.3 and Double T97.3.com with Mike Gustafson and Clint Scott. I'm Aaron Dickens. We're joining you today until 6:30. Love to hear your thoughts and comments in the Yates Flooring Center chat line at Double T97.3.com. Headline from Salt Lake City. Police are investigating reports of two female University of Utah students who allegedly, wore body paint in lieu of tops to the Utah football game on Saturday.
Does that really rise to the level of investigation?
Apparently.
I mean, I'm not doubting the report there, but I had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they're just trying to be really thorough and want to examine as much evidence as they can.
If it's a shabby paint job, I get it, but I mean,
listen, Tech Talk has been ahead of the curve here.
Yep.
We have been pro nipple for coming on a decade now.
Truly one of the first things that was asked of me when I sat in this chair in late June. You asked if I was pro nipple. I can't imagine had I said no where we would have gone. It might have been
that just would have been the end.
That would have been. I made it one day. What happened to that guy that was here on Thursday?
What did you make of the Big 12's weekend overall?
Yeah, pretty impressive. I mean, not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but, of course, I think nationally more people were impressed by the Alabama loss or the Texas loss to Alabama. That ended up being a big-time cover for them. In some ways, enjoyable, as you mentioned yesterday, the idea of getting beat with 20 seconds left. You got your hopes up. There was a different kind of pain that
their hearts were ripped out.
Yeah, that you were hoping for, as opposed to just getting railed 63-7 or whatever. Let's be honest, they looked impressive, and we'll see them here in 11 days. So.
Well, and that's I think the most impressive thing. I mean, if you kind of take your fan hat off, this wasn't a situation where Texas benefited from a bunch of sloppy turnovers, right? I mean, they essentially just kind of played them straight up and came up just short, and they did that with their starting quarterback in the locker room dealing with an injury. Now, I'm sure if you're an Alabama fan, you're going, listen, man, they played a D-plus game, which is, hey, that's fair, but it's a week-to-week sport, and I'm sure that nobody is happier with that result than Nick Saban, right? Because you get the result that you wanted, the victory, but you got a lot of tape that you can kind of critique and analyze, and also you can maybe recapture your players' attention if you didn't have it already.
My takeaway from that was just how I thought their front four looked pretty good, Texas's, and then the Red Raiders later on that afternoon really struggled against a pretty good front four, and so that becomes something to worry about in 5 days or whatever. But or as fans, I guess we can start worrying about it now. But Bama with 186 yards through three quarters and 188 in the fourth, or vice versa. So they turned it on and found a way to win and found something that worked. But that was a big talking point for sure. I think there was really a lot to process. I don't know. Maybe next on my list, or probably the next two things that jumped out, the K-State just rolling. Missouri was impressive. That was the other 11 o'clock game,
and it
really took it to them.
I didn't get a chance to watch much of that game because it was delayed, and by the time that they had really started, I was already on my way to the campus for the for Optimum Game Day Live presented by United Supermarkets. And then once I got there, only can watch one game, you know, and I chose Texas and Alabama to watch on my phone, but looking at the stat sheet, it's not like, I mean, Adrian Martinez was like 9 of 20. You know, and so the kind of the question mark that hangs over him is still there.
I know.
But even then, even with that kind of performance from the quarterback, they still steamrolled them.
It's amazing to me, and it's very early, but it's like K-State under this coach, Chris Kleiman.
I think it's Kleiman.
That they have picked up, to me, right where Bill Snyder left off. And I don't even know talking about super successful or anything else, but you telling me what you just said, they beat a team handily. Quarterback went 9 for 20. A running back had a good day. Deuce Vaughn, like 24 for 140. I'm sure he caught some passes or whatever. Who knows? But probably really good defense, really good special teams, probably not a lot of penalties. And that's just been the K-State way. And so for Kleiman to come in, you know, it would have been another thing if he'd have come in and go, nope, you know, they're throwing the ball all over the place and having success. They just chose a different path. But they picked up where Snyder left off, seemingly, and are getting tremendous production out of guys that aren't highly recruited, some JUCO dudes, some this, some that. Really good running back, a guy that I assume will play in the NFL. And here they are.
And they clearly know who they are, right? There's no question about their identity, right? Or, what they want to accomplish or how they want to accomplish it. And I think
so great
as we, eventually kind of shift our focus a little bit briefly on the Scott Frost Nebraska deal, keep that in mind, right? It's not about winning some press conference. It's not about, puffing your chest out over hiring the most prominent or high-profile candidate, right? That's great. It makes you feel good, but it's meaningless once the games start, 9 months later. And Kleiman was not some kind of high-profile candidate. I mean, I think Neil Brown was kind of thought to be maybe in the mix there. Some other name coaches as well, or at least coaches that we would recognize in kind of the Big 12 footprint. But they recognized it was Kleiman all the way, and it was kind of met with some eyebrows.
Yeah.
Like, it's interesting. It's, and here we are. And not that he has them into some powerhouse, and still a long way to go to get to where Bill Snyder kind of had them at one point. But, they're much, much, much better than they were in those final years of Bill Snyder.
Yep, agree. And it's impressive. The other thing, the other one that grabbed me, and I think Tech's win over Houston ends up being one of the notable results from the weekend. Obviously, we covered that, and we scoot that off to the side. No surprise. I wasn't really surprised by Oklahoma State's result over Arizona State. They beat them pretty good. We talked about the sort of chaos that the Sun Devils are under, but the way Iowa State beat Iowa 10-7, Campbell finally got his win over the University of Iowa, and which he hadn't done for all the success he's had there, relatively speaking. And then, Kansas going to West Virginia and starting Big 12 play, the first Big 12 conference game of the year, by putting up 55 points on West Virginia was a real surprise. Not necessarily that they won, but that they won 50. If you'd have told me they won 31-28, I'd have gone, okay.
Well, and I mean, at one point it seemed like the Mountaineers were kind of not like just cruising to a victory, but they were pretty comfortably ahead. And then they just let the Jayhawks get on some run, and that momentum never stopped. I mean, the Mountaineers were up 28-21 at halftime. At one point, it was, let me pull up the game cast just so that I'm for sure accurate here. At one point, it was 28-14, and then, Jayhawks just kind of go on a run in the second half.
It looked like if you just saw from the first half and the first part of the second
Clay's
half.
been waiting like all week for this.
That they were just not going to ever stop West Virginia, and that would be the tell of the game as Kansas got stopped twice or once or twice, and they couldn't get West Virginia off the field. And then for whatever reason, the defense finally figured it out, and West Virginia had to come back just to get it into overtime.
Were you surprised that Jalen Daniels was not Big 12 Offensive Player of the Week? I mean, threw for 3 touchdowns, right? 220 yards passing, no interceptions, no fumbles as far as I know. Was KU's leading rusher, 85 yards. They go in and win their first conference road game, I think, since 2009.
Honestly, no, it felt like if he would have got it, it still would have been, the ranked win gets the nod, and I get that. I still think it would have been it would have been
here.
It would have been pointing to Kansas. You suck. It's like a handout.
Hey, suddenly Kansas at Houston this weekend looks like
very
a
interesting.
Game.
More Tech Talk next.
The podcast put together with Red Raider fans in mind. This is the Tech Talk Podcast from Double T 97.3.
Hi, how are you? Good afternoon. Happy Tuesday. There's Tech Talk on Double T 97.3 and Double T 97.3.com with Mike Gustafson and Clint Scott. I'm Aaron Dickens with you until 6:30 today. I have Rangers baseball coverage coming up at that time as they open up a series at home against the Oakland A's. First pitch from Globe Life Field, 7:10 p.m. Central Time. High School Fan Zone will start at 7 on 100.7 The Score. Gus, what do you make of Scott Frost being fired after just 3 games this season?
Well, the real surprise there is that it was worth $7.5 million for them to do this now, as opposed to, as I glance at my phone, 3 weeks from now.
Right.
I mean, that was the key. On October 1st, it was until October 1st, it was a $15 million check to buy out to Scott Frost. And on October 1st, it became $7.5. And Trev Alberts said, "Here, I got your 7.5." Makes me think a president, somebody from higher up forced the hand on that, like, get this done. And I don't know if that means, and here's the $7.5 million to get it done, or go find it, or we just signed an $8 billion media rights thing, And I will say this, I don't think I'm running too far off the topic. This is the first evidence of something that was predicted this summer, which is the separation of the SEC and Big Ten in terms of the value of their media rights deals, with the Big Ten firing the first shot by signing their deal here, in August, last month or so. We talked about, so what's the impact of this? If the Big 12's running around with whatever, we've got 35, 40, $45 million media rights packages, and they're running around with almost $100 million, what's the deal? What's the difference? And the separation between those two and everybody else, what's the difference? And one of the key things that everyone pointed to was coaching salaries. And so who are the first 4 names on, I shouldn't say the first 4 names, but who are 4 very prominent names immediately on the tips of writers'
Leipold,
pens?
Kleiman, Matt Campbell, Dave Aranda.
Big Eight, SWC. I mean, they're all Big 12s. But it was a chat group. It was their version of Red Raider Sports, so it was just somebody throwing this out there. But somebody mentioned Gundy. Like, got to rescue Gundy from the Big 12 because the Big 12 is a dying league, and that, again, that was a fan talking there. But that's the perception. And so this hire will be interesting from the standpoint of Nebraska's always had some prestige, and really going back, 15 years or so, it was easy to say 20 years, that it was a blue blood, a college football blue blood. And here we are. Their coaching move is going to be interesting. The real, to the point of your question though, that the timing of it was surprising, because it was really more about just getting rid of Frost than them getting ahead. They can get a little bit ahead on a hire, but unless they go hire an assistant, you're really not going to get a current head coach that's going to leave in the middle of the season to take that job.
Yeah, part of me wonders, and we'll never know this, but if they didn't have Oklahoma coming up right this weekend, and we probably don't appreciate here in Lubbock, here in former Southwest Conference territory, the draw, the pull, the meaning for that game, because it wasn't played every year in the Big 12 because they were in separate divisions. But that rivalry has some heft, and it might be one of those deals where Nebraska cares about it more than Oklahoma, but it has some heft, and they care about it. And I think that if you didn't have Oklahoma coming to town this weekend, maybe you do hold off, right, and kind of hold your nose and just kind of wait for that October 1st date.
Yeah,
but maybe this is a situation where, hey, they want to give their fans, their team, the best chance to compete, right, and show up in that game, and they just didn't have any confidence that was going to happen under Scott Frost. Another theory is, after what you saw on Saturday, where they score 40 points and lose to Georgia Southern, maybe at that point you go, clearly he is not the guy, and nothing that happens in these next 2 weeks will change how I feel about it. And so rather than give him the slimmest chance of kind of salvaging the PR aspect of this thing, I'm going to pull the trigger now where, or when everyone that wears that red N on their hat, right, or has the Nebraska bumper sticker or goes to those games, every single one of them will be like, yep, it was time. It could be some combination of the two, but as you mentioned, I don't know that $7.5 million is that meaningful to them in their situation. And to your point about the Big Ten media deal, I think that we actually saw the result of this, the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, last year when Penn State gives James Franklin a 10-year, mostly guaranteed contract, when Michigan State gives Mel Tucker, largely unproven, a 10-year, mostly guaranteed contract. They knew, right? They had enough reason to believe and understand that, hey, we've got a big payout coming. This is going to seem really, really out there now, but a year from now, it will look like not that big of a deal, maybe even a bargain. And so here we are. It'll be interesting to see, I think, where Nebraska turns. There's going to be this kind of temptation, I think, for Nebraska fans, certainly, and perhaps the administration, to go big game hunting, right? Urban Meyer, Matt Campbell, Luke Fickell, Dave Aranda, those types. Are those the best fits? Right, I would think that everyone agrees mostly that the shine has come off a bit of Matt Campbell, although he recaptured some of that this weekend by beating Iowa and finally kind of getting that monkey off of his back. But, I mean, to me, call me crazy, the guy that would do the best there, Chris Kleiman. Midwest guy through and through, right? Born in Iowa, has coached all around that area. Clearly has an identity, clearly not reliant on, pulling in 4- and 5-star players.
Yeah. And that's a big deal.
Can identify talent. You would sure think can develop talent.
Because so much of Dr. Tom Osborne's early identity was, they had really good teams there and won a lot, win as national champions, until they started getting Tommy Frazier and those guys out of Florida and California and getting some more speed. But, there was a real identity there for Nebraska getting the corn-fed Nebraska kids and getting them going. Now, they were heavy into strength and conditioning very early, and with that, in that era, probably not a big surprise there. There's a lot of steroids going around. back then.
Really?
I know, but they were the first to build a huge weight room. Boyd Epley was kind of a legendary strength and conditioning coach, and they were all in on that deal, and they were constantly one of the most physical teams in the country.
More Tech Talk next.
It's every Red Raiders' favorite podcast. This is the Tech Talk Podcast from Double T 97.3.
Hello there. It's The Juice on Double T 97.3 and Double T 97.3.com. Your look at today's biggest sports headlines, brought to you by our good friends at Specs Wine, Spirits, and Finer Foods. 2 convenient locations here in the fine city of Lubbock. You've got 4th Street and the West Loop behind the Whataburger, and also Slide Road and 69th Street. And of course, specsonline.com is always open and ready for you. Some headlines. Rangers are in action tonight, hosting the Oakland A's. They're in Arlington. First pitch from Globe Life Field, 7:05 p.m. Central Time. Rangers fresh off of a doubleheader against the Marlins. They split, won the first game 3-2, lost the second 10-6. It's a weird bit of scheduling there, Gus. Right? You have a home series against the Blue Jays. You wrap that up on Sunday, go to Miami, play 2 games, fly back. Recognize that a lot of this is because of the holdout and all that stuff, the lockout.
That's rough. You would love to. I'm sure they would have preferred to squeeze that in on a trip to Tampa or something, just pop over there. But I mean, I think about the support personnel and those folks that loaded up all of the things that are required to pack a team up on Sunday night after the game in Arlington, flew over there, set up for a doubleheader, a split doubleheader, so I had a really long day at the ballpark, and then pack all that crap up back to Arlington for the game tonight. I bet those dudes slept well.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Astros will open up a series against the Tigers tonight in Detroit. First pitch set for 5:40 p.m. Central Time. We will have that game for you on 100.7 Score, but we will join it in progress at 8 o'clock after the conclusion of the high school fan zone. Tigers have lost 3 games in a row at home. Former Texas Tech star Jarrett Culver has signed a 2-way contract with the Atlanta Hawks. He's coming to Atlanta from the Memphis Grizzlies, where he averaged 3.5 points and 1.3 rebounds per game. He appeared in 37 contests. Former 6th overall pick in the 2019 NBA draft. You too can join the program. Let us know what you think on the Yates Flooring Center chat line at doublet973.com. And of course, the Juice brought to you by our friends at Specs Wine, Spirits, and Finer Foods. This on the Yates Flooring Center chat line. Nebraska wants to get a head start on talks with Gary Patterson, Lance Leipold, and Luke Fickell. Do you think that, and ultimately it doesn't matter, right? Because no matter the fan reaction, if they end up winning games, it will all be fine. And so if you are the AD, if you're the administration, you feel like this person is the best fit for your job, right, and the best candidate to get you to where you want to be, whether that's winning 9 games a year or competing for a Big Ten championship, you owe it to yourself and your job and your program to pursue that person. Do you think that a Lance Leipold hire would go over well at all in Huskerland?
Probably not.
Is it Husker Nation? Do they use that? Surely not. Surely they're too proud of a program to stoop to the nation level.
I don't know. They've stooped
sea
to
of
some new
red.
levels in a lot of things. So,
yes, I sort of quit paying attention to them. But when they were in the league with us, it's like, oh, their fans clap for the other team
because they always won.
Yeah,
not anymore.
I wonder. Yeah, and of course, I don't care about them now.
Right.
I don't really hear those stories anymore. And if they're still clapping for I wonder if they clap for the other team. Yay, Georgia Southern, nice effort.
You did so good.
That was such a great effort. And I'm guessing they were.
Is that like your Midwest mom accent
kind of
impression?
Jocular, kind of weenie voice. Yeah. which probably wouldn't really direct it at anybody. I always thought that was sort of wimpy and do-goody and
probably makes a pretty good corn casserole,
white bread kind of deal that they've got going there. Not as white bread as
Calls
our fans.
pop.
Not as white bread as the videos of our friends in College Station, but that's another topic for another
TC.
segment.
Have you seen the one
Good Lord.
from Fort Worth?
Just Caucasians everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, just super cringe.
Our
friend El Jefe says this: Chris Kennedy loves the TCU riff-raff, boom-ba, lickety-splickety, woo-wame, or whatever the hell video with Sonny Dykes. Yeah, that thing is...
Lawnmowers.
Yeah, it's so... I don't get it, man. I don't get it. This on the Yates Flooring Center chat line from Shelley, and this doesn't seem very bad at all, but she says Chris Kennedy likes angel hair pasta. El Jefe says candy corn is the Chris Kennedy of the candy world. Sooner in Lubbock gets us back on track. Did Nebraska's downfall start when Tech beat them 70-10 in Lubbock? LOL.
Well, I think
you and I talked about this actually a few weeks ago.
Solich, wasn't it? I mean, wasn't Solich the one that when they let Solich go, they were going along at 9-2 every year and weren't really what they had been in their heyday. And Solich was sort of the guy who followed the guy, and they fired him, and he went to Ohio University or whatever, and it fell apart. Like Solich was still trying to carry on that black shirts and the heavy running game, pounding the rock and physical, and it wasn't quite landing the way it had with Dr. Tom. And then they became a 4-win disaster.
Under Bill Callahan.
Yes, and I mean, like historically bad results, including the whipping they took here. And so it was turning at that point, or it had turned by the time they came here and got worked, and then the loss up there to us the following year.
I think if you want to maybe pinpoint the moment that it started to kind of go south, it was the 2001 Colorado game, where I think they entered that game ranked, they were 11-0, so they were ranked second in the country. And they go to Colorado and get smoked, 62-36. And at that point, I think it was kind of like, oh, the emperor has no clothes, so to speak. Again, they won 11 games that year, right. So it wasn't as if they were just terrible. But I think that was kind of like the 09 A&M game. I've always pinpointed that game.
I agree.
In Lubbock as kind of the moment where the momentum that you had built throughout the first 10 years of this millennium, that's when it began to really shift, because you were kind of invincible, you thought, at home. Certainly against A&M, they hadn't won Lubbock since like 93 or something. They were not that good that year. They just gotten worked by K-State. And you had a bit of momentum.
Yeah, it was a flip of what had been the history of that deal. Yeah. We were the ones always coming off the upset loss to North Texas, and they would come in here number 6 in the country and get beat. And it flipped. That was the year we were heavy favorites. All of our fans were cocky. And I'll say this, and I'm glad the Liberty Bowl took place, because it feels like all the Leach, all of that stuff sort of finally faded away.
Exercised some demons.
God almighty. Yes, the people that were hanging on to that crap forever. But I will forever say that game and then the Baylor locker room tape, with all the cussing, which I cussed my fair share, so it's all the restraint I can put together to get 3 hours with no really. FCC violations in here. So I'm not judging that, but because a lot of that ended up being the Baron Batch prayer circle. We had to quit praying. He went down a path on that deal. Leach did. And I'm like, okay, that's his deal, whatever. But I will forever maintain that those two moments were going to. I'm not saying the beginning of the end, like he was going to get fired the next year. I'm not saying that. But I've always maintained that I don't think it was ever going to be the same after those two things right there in 2009, and then it obviously unraveled weeks later. But yeah, that was a different deal. But back to the Nebraska thing, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know what goes on with Leipold and Fickle right now on the list of the original texter at the beginning of this segment. Those two guys are head coaches. Now, I'm not saying they're not interested in that job, but it would be unprecedented for guys to leave a job in the middle, a head coach to leave a team in the middle of the season and say, yep, hey, boys at Cincinnati, hey, Kansas, been great. I'm not saying between a regular season game and a bowl game. I'm not saying for rumors to be going crazy, but those conversations are happening between whoever Albert's consultant is, whoever his hiring guy is, and their agents, like way off the beaten path.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be. They're not going to hire anybody midway through the season. No. I don't think. I think it's more about, hey, let's get our ducks in a row. Let's build consensus on who we want to target. Reach out, intermediaries, kind of gauge their reaction, etc. More Tech Talk next.
The podcast that finishes your workday in a very Red Raider way. This is the Tech Talk Podcast from Double T 97.3.
You know, if you're a Nebraska fan, you know, you're probably, because I saw some talk about this over the weekend after Scott Frost was dismissed. And, I mean, they're in the same division as Northwestern, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Purdue. None of those programs just stand out way above the rest in terms of like, okay, they have a significant inherent advantage over the rest of them, right? Ohio State is not in this division. Penn State, not in the division. Michigan State. I mean, Iowa is a solid team, right? Mm-hmm. You've got to work to beat them. Wisconsin has been very good at times. But again,
disappointing result for them the other day.
Right.
By the way.
There's no doubt. Big time result for our man Eric Morris.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a gettable division. You know, you don't need to go through some kind of 2 or 3 year rebuild process and build the roster back up from scratch in order to kind of close some kind of wide talent gap with the Hawkeyes, right, or Wisconsin. But here's my question, Gus. Is that going to be true 2 years from now? Is that going to be the paradigm 2 years from now? Because sure seems like all these conferences are moving away from divisions.
Yeah.
You know? And so suddenly maybe you're not playing in some kind of like, you know, weaker division of the Big Ten. Maybe you're still playing a bunch of tough teams every year.
Are we prepared to go, our pod is so much tougher than your pod?
I mean, their schedule.
Sucks.
I mean, because if you look at the Big 12, right, absent Texas and Oklahoma, I think most people on the outside will go, okay, that's a manageable situation for some team to come out of and go to the playoff, right? There is no, as you were saying with the Big 8, where it was this constant annual, hey, no matter how good you are, Missouri, Oklahoma State, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Nebraska will be there. Yep. Waiting for you.
Yep.
It doesn't really exist as we know it now in the new look Big 12. It seems like that's going to be the case there in Lincoln, right? And in West Lafayette, because if you abandon divisions and suddenly say, hey, just the 2 teams with the best records are going to go play for the championship in Indianapolis, suddenly you don't have that kind of built-in advantage over, we play a much easier schedule.
Yes, that's a great point. It would almost create a level of hopelessness maybe in the West Lafayette's, almost a return to the old Big Ten days where Champaign-Urbana, Bloomington, West Lafayette, they start every year going, whoa, what are we doing here?
Because like if you're Minnesota right now,
there you go, that's another one.
Right, if you're the Golden Gophers, I mean I couldn't spend 5 minutes talking about their roster or their coaching staff, but I've read enough to where I think they're pretty optimistic about this season, at least by Golden Gopher standards. They're 2-0. They got a game against Colorado this weekend in the Twin Cities. I would guess that's going to be another victory because Colorado's not very good.
Credit Colorado for that schedule. That's TCU and Minnesota on there. It's scheduling 2 Power 5s isn't an automatic for most Power 5s, but go ahead.
But they don't play, again, benefit of the division format. They don't play Ohio State. They don't play Michigan. They host Nebraska. I'm sorry, they host Iowa, right, which is probably their toughest division game. They play at Michigan State, at Penn State. Those are ranked teams. But again, much better playing them than Ohio State and Michigan, I would sure think.
Oh, sure.
So favorable schedule, I think an experienced quarterback, some key pieces returning on offense, defense. They could very easily, right, very easily win the Big Ten West and play for a championship. If you do away with divisions, suddenly that prospect becomes much, much more difficult.
Yeah, the Cinderella run seems next to impossible. Now, what would be cool is something that we had kicked around deep in the summer when we're looking for stuff to talk about. The idea of breaking it into those smaller pods, and then the final game of the regular season is the matchup of
having your own playoff, essentially.
Yeah, the 4 seeds play each other, the 3 seeds, the 2 seeds, the 1 seeds. And so it does create a pathway. Ultimately, we still have to figure out a way to beat Ohio State. All right, we know that. But it creates sort of a month-long playoff scenario. I'm really intrigued by that, and I'm sure there's a zillion hoops to jump through. But that is such an interesting idea to create, an interesting game at the end of the schedule. Because if you're 2-9 and you're playing 9-2, am I getting that right? Yeah. Oh, great! Get our faces kicked in one more time, Whereas, and not that you're that excited, but we're playing another 2-9, but you might show up at the stadium and go, we have a shot to win this game. We got a shot to, versus if you're the 2-8-4 teams and you're lining up going, hey, yeah, I saw the bowl projections and this got us kind of interesting matchup here. You're playing 2 of those type games in a row at the end of the season. Two sort of comparable. No, they're not national championship contenders, but they're not teams that are really bad. That interesting games to watch.
And I would think too, and this might be the most important component of that. I would sure think that TV partners would be all over that.
Yeah,
because you're essentially guaranteeing uber relevant, pertinent, and compelling matchups at the end of the season versus just hoping that, hey, these 2 rivals, hopefully they're good, right? Hopefully these teams are good. Hopefully this matchup is good. You're essentially just you can write that in pen and say, we've got a really good lineup at the end of the season. We don't know who's going to play in what games or where, but we know we can count on this in our back pocket.
Two seeds, 2 1 seeds, whatever. Speaking of that, it's in the category of way too early bowl projections. And of course, it's all about the Final Four, and it was whoever it was that did this projection. I think it was McMurphy, the entity that he's with.
The Action.
Yeah, the
Network.
Action. Yeah, he. Bama, Georgia, Ohio State, somebody, whatever. The bowl projection involving Texas Tech versus Washington State in one of the DFW bowls. And I thought we could do a whole lot. Yeah, we could have a scenario a whole lot less compelling than that. I'd be just fine with that.
You've been listening to the Tech Talk podcast from Double T 97.3. Check out Double T973.com for more from Lubbock Sports Station.